The day my daughter walked into my vineyard with a legal briefcase and said, "Mother, it's time you stepped aside and let someone who actually understands this generation take over," I realized she hadn't come home to reconcile. She'd come to collect what she thought was hers. What she didn't know was that the heartless businesswoman she'd spent decades resenting had been quietly preparing for exactly this moment. My name is Margaret Blackwood. I'm 70 years old. Most women my age are planning cruise itineraries or arguing with their gardeners about rose bushes. Instead, I was standing in the marble-floored tasting room of Blackwood Estate Wines at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. I was watching my daughter Victoria for the first time in 23 years, 4 months and 16 days. Yes, I'd been counting. The estate sprawls across 400 acres of prime Napa Valley real estate. Rolling hills are covered in perfectly aligned rows of Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnay, and Pinot Noir vines. The main building is a 3-story stone mansion. I designed it myself. Part family residence, part wine production facility, part monument to everything I'd clawed my way up from nothing to build. Carved into the massive oak doors at the entrance are the words, "Blackwood Estate, founded 1999" in elegant script. 24 years of 18-hour days, missed holidays, and sacrificed relationships reduced to a simple brass plaque. But it wasn't simple. Nothing about building this empire had been simple. Do it! I watched Victoria stride through my tasting room like she owned the place. Her designer heels clicked against the Italian marble I'd personally selected in Carrara. She wore a perfectly tailored charcoal business suit. It probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her auburn hair was styled in that aggressive corporate bob that screamed, "I'm here to take charge." Everything about her posture, her expression, her calculated movements said she belonged here. In her mind, she absolutely did. She had no idea that the woman she was about to try to push aside had spent the last 5 years preparing for her inevitable return. She had no idea that every legal document, every business structure, every financial arrangement had been carefully constructed with this exact moment in mind. Victoria stopped in the center of the tasting room. She stood directly under the crystal chandelier I'd had imported from Austria. She set her leather briefcase down on the hand-carved tasting bar, the same bar where celebrities, politicians, and wine connoisseurs had praised my creations for over 2 decades. The same bar where I'd built relationships that turned Blackwood Estate from a dream into a $50 million annual business. "Hello, Mother," she said. Her voice carried that particular blend of disdain and entitlement I remembered so well. "We need to talk." 23 years of silence. Those were her opening words. Not "I've missed you," not "I'm sorry for the things I said," not even a simple "how are you?" Just the cold efficiency of someone who'd come to conduct business. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the silver service set that had belonged to my grandmother. It was one of the few things I'd managed to keep when I lost everything the first time. The porcelain clinked softly against the saucer. It was the only sound in the vast room besides the distant hum of refrigeration units keeping thousands of bottles of wine at perfect temperature. "Victoria," I said calmly, meeting her gaze across 24 years of achievement she'd never witnessed. "You look well." It was true. At 45, Victoria had inherited my bone structure and her father's height. This created an imposing presence that had probably served her well in whatever corporate battlefield she'd been conquering for the past 2 decades. Her skin was flawless in that expensive way that comes from regular spa treatments and dermatologist visits. Her nails were manicured. Her jewelry was understated but clearly costly. Everything about her screamed success, sophistication, and supreme confidence. Everything except her eyes. Her eyes held the same cold anger I remembered from the day she walked out of my life. "Let's skip the pleasantries," Victoria said. She pulled a manila folder from her briefcase. "I'm here about the estate." Of course she was. Not about reconciliation, not about the grandchildren I'd never met, not about the decades of silence or the birthday cards I'd sent that were never acknowledged. She was here about money and property and inheritance rights. "What about the estate?" I asked. I already knew. I'd been expecting this conversation since the day my private investigator informed me that Victoria had been asking questions about Blackwood Estate's corporate structure. That was 18 months ago. I'd used every day since then to prepare. Victoria opened the folder. She spread several documents across the tasting bar. Legal papers, I noticed. Incorporation filings. Financial assessments. Property valuations. She'd done her homework. "Mother, you're 70 years old," she began. Her voice took on the patronizing tone of someone explaining something obvious to a child. "This business is massive, complex and demanding. You've built something incredible here. But let's be realistic about your capacity to continue managing it effectively." Your capacity to continue managing it effectively. The audacity was breathtaking. A woman who'd been absent from my life for over 2 decades was questioning my capacity. She knew nothing about my daily routine, my mental acuity, my business relationships, or my operational knowledge. "Go on," I said. I sipped my coffee and let her hang herself with her own words. "The wine industry has changed dramatically since you started this place," Victoria continued. She was warming to her prepared speech. "Digital marketing, social media presence, e-commerce platforms, data analytics, supply chain optimization. These aren't areas where someone of your generation typically excels. Someone of your generation." At 70, I was apparently a relic too old to understand the modern world. This from a woman whose only knowledge of my business came from whatever Google searches and financial reports she'd managed to obtain. "I've been watching the estate's performance metrics," she said. She pulled out a tablet and scrolled through what looked like financial spreadsheets. "Revenue growth has been flat for the past 3 years. Your social media presence is practically non-existent. Your e-commerce platform looks like it was designed in 2005. You're leaving millions of dollars on the table. Revenue growth flat for 3 years. Social media presence non-existent. E-commerce platform outdated." She'd clearly done some research. But like most people who rely on surface-level data analysis, she was missing the full picture. What Victoria didn't know was that the flat revenue growth was entirely intentional. For the past 5 years, I'd been deliberately limiting production and maintaining waiting lists rather than expanding. Scarcity creates value in the luxury market. Our wines now commanded premium prices precisely because they were difficult to obtain. What she didn't know was that our non-existent social media presence was a calculated strategy. Blackwood Estate had cultivated an aura of exclusivity and old-world sophistication. This would be diminished by Instagram posts and Twitter updates. Our customers valued discretion and tradition over viral marketing campaigns. What she didn't know was that our outdated e-commerce platform processed over $15 million in annual sales. It had a customer retention rate of 94%. Sometimes functionality matters more than flashy design, but I wasn't going to explain any of that to her. Not yet. "Interesting analysis," I said. "Continue." Victoria straightened her shoulders. She was clearly interpreting my calm response as agreement. "I've spent the last 20 years in corporate strategy and business development. I've helped companies modernize, optimize their operations, and maximize their market potential. I understand digital transformation, brand positioning, and growth strategies. 20 years in corporate strategy, business development, digital transformation. All very impressive buzzwords that told me exactly nothing about her actual capabilities or achievements. But she was building towards something. I wanted to hear the full proposal before I responded. "What are you suggesting?" I asked. "A partnership," Victoria said. For the first time, her voice carried a note of something that might have been genuine enthusiasm. "You've built the foundation, the reputation, the product quality, the vineyard operations. I can build the future, the marketing, the expansion, the modernization that will take Blackwood Estate to the next level. A partnership." How generous of her to offer to partner with me in running my own company. "You'd maintain your position as founder and majority owner," she continued quickly. It was as if she sensed my skepticism. "But I'd handle day-to-day operations, strategic planning, and business development. Think of it as a succession plan that maximizes the value of everything you've built." Succession plan. There it was. the real purpose of her visit wrapped in corporate speak and family reconciliation rhetoric. Victoria hadn't come home to rebuild our relationship. She'd come home to position herself as my heir. And what would this partnership look like legally? I asked. Victoria's eyes lit up. She thought she had me interested. I've had my legal team draft a preliminary agreement, she said. She pulled another set of documents from her briefcase. You'd retain 51% ownership and the title of chairman. I'd receive 49% equity in exchange for taking over operational responsibilities as CEO. 49% equity. CEO responsibilities. In exchange for what, exactly? Her presence? Her supposed expertise? Her willingness to grace my life with her attention after 23 years of silence? That's quite generous of you, I said dryly. To offer me the privilege of remaining majority owner of the company I built from nothing. Victoria missed the sarcasm entirely. I know it's a significant change, she said. But Mother, be honest with yourself. How much longer can you realistically continue at this pace? You're 70 years old. You should be enjoying your golden years, not working 18-hour days. Enjoying my golden years. Working 18-hour days. She was painting a picture of me as some desperate old woman clinging to relevance instead of gracefully accepting obsolescence. Hef. The truth was, I did work long hours. But not because I was desperately clinging to control. I worked long hours because I loved every aspect of what I'd built. I loved walking the vineyard rows at sunrise, checking the grape development and soil conditions. I loved the cellar tastings, where we decided which barrels were ready for bottling. I loved the harvest season chaos when every decision could affect the quality of an entire vintage. Most of all, I loved the independence. For 24 years, every major decision had been mine to make. Every success had been earned through my choices, my relationships, my expertise. The idea of handing that autonomy over to anyone was inconceivable, especially someone who'd been absent from my life for over 2 decades. Victoria, I said carefully, what makes you think I want a partner? The question seemed to catch her off guard. Well, I assumed you'd want to ensure the business continues successfully after you're gone. After you're gone. Another gentle reminder of my mortality and her youth. Another suggestion that my time was ending and hers was beginning. I'm 70, not 90, I said. I have no immediate plans to be gone anywhere. Of course not, Victoria said quickly. I just meant long-term planning, estate planning, legacy preservation. Legacy preservation. She was positioning herself as the guardian of my legacy, rather than the opportunist she actually was. Tell me about your experience in the wine industry, I said. Victoria shifted slightly. Well, I don't have direct wine industry experience. But business principles are universal. Strategy, operations, marketing, financial management. These skills transfer across industries. No direct wine industry experience. But business principles are universal. She wanted to take over a business she knew nothing about because she had generic corporate experience. Victoria, do you know the difference between malolactic fermentation and carbonic maceration? I asked. She blinked. No, but I'd learn the technical aspects. My role would be more strategic than operational. Do you know why we harvest our Pinot Noir at night? I assume it's about temperature control. Do you know which of our wines won double gold at the San Francisco International Wine Competition last year? Mother, these are details. I'd work with your existing team to handle the technical aspects while I focus on business growth and modernization. Details. 24 years of accumulated knowledge about viticulture, fermentation, aging, blending, and wine production were just details. She'd delegate those to my existing team, while she focused on the important work of business growth. Victoria, let me understand your proposal, I said. You want me to give you half my company in exchange for your promise to modernize operations in an industry you know nothing about. I want to help you maximize the value of what you've built, she corrected. And yes, I'd expect equity compensation for that contribution. Equity compensation. For her contribution. As if her mere presence was worth half of everything I'd spent a lifetime building. What if I'm not interested in maximizing value, I asked. What if I'm satisfied with the business exactly as it is? Victoria's expression shifted from confident to concerned. Mother, that's exactly the kind of thinking that leads to business decline. Markets don't stay static. Companies that don't grow inevitably shrink. Companies that don't grow inevitably shrink. More business school wisdom delivered with the certainty of someone who'd never actually built anything from scratch. Victoria, I've been growing this business for 24 years, I said. Slowly, carefully, sustainably. I've survived economic recessions, industry consolidation, changing consumer preferences, and global pandemics. I think I understand something about business sustainability. Of course you do, Victoria said. Her tone shifted to that patronizing patience adults use with elderly relatives. You've done amazingly well. But today's business environment is more complex, more competitive, more technology-driven than when you started. More complex, more competitive, more technology-driven. All reasons why someone of my advanced age couldn't possibly understand or navigate the modern business world. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the vineyard's central courtyard. Outside, the morning sun was painting the vine leaves gold and green. I could see my vineyard manager, Carlos, directing the pruning crew through their morning routine. Carlos had been with me for 15 years. He knew every acre of the property, every vine's history, every microclimate variation that affected grape quality. Beyond the courtyard, the rolling hills stretched toward the Mayacamas Mountains. They were covered in precisely planted rows that represented not just agricultural land, but relationships with soil, climate, and time that took decades to develop. This wasn't just a business to me. It was a living thing I'd nurtured from bare earth into one of Napa Valley's most respected wine estates. Victoria, I said without turning around, why now? What do you mean? You've been gone for 23 years. No contact, no visits, no interest in what I was building here. Why are you suddenly concerned about my business operations? Silence. When I turned back to face her, Victoria was staring down at her legal documents. Her confident expression was replaced by something that looked almost like shame. I've been following the estate's success, she said finally. From a distance. I always planned to reconnect, but what? But you seemed so focused on work. So successful without me. I wasn't sure there was room in your life for reconciliation. Not sure there was room for reconciliation. She'd punished me for 23 years because I seemed too successful, because I'd built a life without her, rather than collapsing into despair over her absence. So you decided the best time to reconnect was when you wanted something from me? I asked. It's not like that, Victoria said quickly. I want to be part of your life, part of the business, part of the legacy you've built, part of the legacy I'd built. But only now, when that legacy had tangible value. Only when there was something worth claiming. Victoria, do you know why you left? I asked. The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. For the first time since she'd walked into my tasting room, Victoria looked genuinely uncomfortable. We had different priorities, she said carefully. Different values. Be specific. Victoria took a deep breath. You chose work over family. You missed my high school graduation because of some wine industry conference. You missed my college graduation because of harvest season. When I got engaged, you asked if we could schedule the wedding around your production schedule. The accusations were familiar. I'd heard them all before, 23 years ago, in a screaming match that ended with Victoria declaring that she never wanted to see me again. What she'd said then, what she was implying now, was that I'd been a terrible mother because I'd prioritized building a business over attending social events. What Victoria had never understood was that I hadn't been choosing work over family. I'd been choosing survival over convenience. Every conference, every harvest season, every business decision had been about building something that could provide security and opportunity for both of us. When Victoria was 17, I was a struggling single mother trying to turn a failed vineyard purchase into a viable business. When she was 21, I was desperately working to establish market presence and build distribution relationships. When she got engaged at 22, I was fighting to keep the estate afloat during a severe economic downturn that bankrupted half the small wineries in Napa Valley. But Victoria had never seen the struggle. She'd only seen the choices that inconvenienced her. "You're right," I said. "I missed events that were important to you. I made choices that prioritized business over family time." Victoria looked surprised. She'd expected me to defend my past decisions. "But, Victoria," I continued, "those choices built everything you're now asking me to share with you. The estate you want 49% of exists because I worked through your graduation. The legacy you want to be part of was created during the harvest seasons I couldn't leave." "I understand that now," Victoria said. "As an adult, I understand the sacrifices you made. That's why I want to help carry the burden going forward. Help carry the burden." She was repositioning 23 years of anger and resentment as mature understanding and daughterly concern. "Victoria, what do you do for work?" I asked. "I'm a senior director of strategic planning at Morrison & Associates," she said. "We're a business consulting firm based in San Francisco." Senior Director of Strategic Planning. Business Consulting. Corporate titles that told me she had experience giving advice about businesses she didn't own or operate. "Do you own equity in Morrison & Associates?" I asked. "Well, no, it's not that kind of firm. But I have profit sharing and performance bonuses that." "So you've never actually built a business from scratch?" "I've helped dozens of companies optimize their operations and growth strategies. Helped other people build their businesses. That's different from building your own." Victoria's jaw tightened. "Mother, are you going to dismiss my qualifications because I chose corporate consulting over entrepreneurship? I'm trying to understand why you think consulting experience qualifies you to run a wine estate." "Because business is business," Victoria said. Her professional composure was starting to crack. "Strategy, operations, marketing, financial management, these are universal skills." "Wine is not business," I said firmly. "Wine is agriculture, chemistry, artistry, and relationship building. It's understanding terroir and vintage variation and customer preferences that take decades to develop." "Those are operational details," Victoria said dismissively. "Strategic leadership is about vision, direction, and growth optimization." Operational details. Strategic leadership. Vision and growth optimization. She was reducing everything I'd spent decades learning to details, while elevating her theoretical knowledge to strategic leadership. I walked back to the tasting bar and poured myself another cup of coffee. The morning sun was now streaming through the windows. It illuminated the dust motes that danced in the air like tiny golden spirits. In a few hours, the tasting room would fill with visitors who'd driven up from San Francisco, or flown in from around the world to experience what we'd built here. People who understood that great wine couldn't be optimized or strategized into existence. "Victoria, let me tell you what strategic leadership in the wine business actually looks like," I said. "It's walking the vineyard every morning to check soil moisture and pest pressure. It's knowing which blocks ripen first, and adjusting harvest timing by hours, not days. It's tasting through 100-barrel samples to create a blend that honors the vintage character." Victoria was staring at me with a mixture of frustration and impatience. "Mother, that's micromanagement, not strategic leadership." "That's craftsmanship," I corrected. "And craftsmanship is what built the reputation you're now asking me to let you leverage." "I'm not asking to leverage anything," Victoria said. Her voice was rising slightly. "I'm offering to help you build on what you've accomplished. By giving you half my company. By bringing modern business expertise to complement your traditional winemaking knowledge." Modern business expertise to complement traditional winemaking knowledge. She was positioning herself as the missing piece that would complete my supposedly incomplete business. "Victoria, this estate generates $50 million in annual revenue with a profit margin that would make your consulting clients weep with envy," I said. "What exactly about our performance suggests we need modern business expertise?" "Revenue isn't everything," Victoria said. "Market position, brand equity, growth potential, operational efficiency." "Our wines sell out before we release them," I interrupted. "We have a waiting list for our reserve selections that stretches 18 months. Food and Wine magazine has featured us on their cover 3 times. What market position are you concerned about? Victoria paused. She clearly wasn't expecting me to push back with actual performance metrics. I'm talking about unrealized potential, she said finally. Opportunities for expansion, diversification, market penetration. Unrealized potential. Opportunities for expansion. Market penetration. More corporate speak that had nothing to do with the actual business of making wine. Victoria, do you know what happens when wineries focus on expansion over quality? I asked. They grow their market share and increase profitability. They dilute their brand and destroy their reputation. The wine business isn't technology consulting. You can't just add more servers to increase capacity. Vineyard land is finite. Aging time is non-negotiable. Customer relationships are built over decades, not quarters. But surely there are opportunities for product line extension, brand partnerships, licensing arrangements. Product line extension like what? Blackwood Estate Vodka? Brand partnerships with energy drink companies? Licensing our name to mass-market wine producers? Victoria looked frustrated. I'm talking about strategic growth opportunities that leverage existing brand equity while maintaining quality standards. Strategic growth opportunities that leverage existing brand equity. She was speaking in corporate buzzwords because she didn't actually understand the business she wanted to help me run. Victoria, let me ask you a direct question, I said. If you became CEO tomorrow, what would you change? Her eyes lit up. This was clearly something she'd prepared for. First, I'd conduct a comprehensive operational audit to identify efficiency improvements and cost reduction opportunities. Then I'd develop a 5-year strategic plan focused on revenue diversification and market expansion. Operational audit, efficiency improvements, cost reduction, revenue diversification. She was planning to apply generic consulting methodologies to a business that had been fine-tuned over decades. Be specific, I said. What operations would you audit? Well, production processes, supply chain management, labor allocation, technology utilization. Victoria, our production processes are based on techniques that have been refined over centuries. Our supply chain consists of relationships with local cooperages and glass manufacturers that we've developed over decades. Our labor allocation follows the rhythm of the growing season, not corporate efficiency models. But surely there are opportunities for automation, process optimization. Automation of what? Tasting wine to determine readiness? Reading the vineyard to decide harvest timing? Building relationships with customers who appreciate handcrafted products? Victoria was starting to look genuinely frustrated. Mother, you're being deliberately obtuse. Every business has opportunities for improvement. And every business consultant believes their outside perspective reveals opportunities that industry experts have somehow missed. That's exactly right, Victoria said. She missed my sarcasm entirely. Fresh eyes, objective analysis, best practices from other industries. Victoria, this isn't other industries. This is wine. And wine is different. Different how? I set down my coffee cup and looked directly at my daughter. This accomplished, confident, successful woman who understood nothing about the business she wanted to help me run. Wine is different because it's not just a product, it's an expression of place and time and human intention. Every vintage tells the story of that year's weather, that season's decisions, that harvest's challenges. You can't optimize terroir, you can't automate wisdom, you can't strategically plan around variables like rainfall and temperature and disease pressure that are completely beyond your control. Victoria stared at me in silence for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, more measured. Mother, I hear what you're saying about the artisanal aspects of winemaking. But at the end of the day, this is still a business. You still have to manage cash flow, control costs, maximize revenue, plan for growth. Those are universal business principles. And I've been managing those universal business principles successfully for 24 years. But what happens when you can't anymore? There it was. The real question underlying her entire proposal. What happens when you're too old to continue? What makes you think I can't anymore? I asked. Victoria gestured toward the documents spread across the tasting bar. The performance metrics I showed you? Flat revenue growth, limited market expansion, minimal digital presence. These are signs of a business that's stagnating, or signs of a business that's prioritizing sustainability over growth. Sustainability requires growth, Mother. Companies that don't grow get acquired or go out of business. By whom? Who's going to acquire Blackwood Estate? Victoria paused. Well, there are several large wine conglomerates that have been consolidating smaller premium producers. You've researched acquisition targets? I interrupted. I've researched the industry landscape as part of my analysis. So you know that Constellation Brands has been acquiring premium Napa wineries. You know that Jackson Family Wines has been expanding their portfolio. You know that there's consolidation pressure in the industry. Yes, which is why it's important to strengthen our market position and operational efficiency before we become an acquisition target ourselves? Victoria hesitated. Before market forces make that decision for us. Market forces. The invisible hand of corporate inevitability that would somehow compel me to sell my life's work, unless I accepted her partnership proposal. Victoria, let me explain something about the wine business that your industry research might have missed, I said. The premium segment isn't subject to the same consolidation pressures as mass-market producers. Our customers don't want us to be owned by Constellation Brands. They want us to remain family-owned, small-scale, and artisanal. But family-owned doesn't mean single owner, Victoria said quickly. It means family succession, family legacy, family tradition. Family succession. Family legacy. Family tradition. She was finally getting to the emotional manipulation part of her pitch. Victoria, when you left 23 years ago, what did you say about family tradition? Another uncomfortable pause. I said I didn't want to be trapped by your expectations. You said family tradition was just another form of emotional manipulation. You said you'd rather make your own way in the world than live in my shadow. I was 22 years old and angry. And now you're 45 and ready to claim your inheritance? I'm 45 and ready to be part of something meaningful, Victoria said. Her voice took on a note of what might have been genuine emotion. I've spent 20 years building other people's businesses. I want to build something that matters. Something that lasts. Something that could be passed down to my children. Your children. The grandchildren I'd never met. Victoria, do you have children? 2 daughters. Emma is 16, Sophie is 14. 2 granddaughters. 16 and 14 years old. Old enough to have opinions, personalities, dreams of their own. Old enough to have wondered about the grandmother they'd never met. Do they know about me? I asked. They know they have a grandmother in California. They know you own a winery. Do they know why we don't speak? Victoria looked down at her hands. They know we had disagreements about priorities and lifestyle choices. What would they say if they knew you were here asking for half my business? They'd say I was trying to build something for their future. Building something for their future. Just like I'd been building something for Victoria's future when she decided I was choosing work over family. Victoria, let me ask you something. If your daughters told you they wanted to leave college and start their own businesses, would you support them? That would depend on their plans, their preparation, their realistic assessment of the challenges. Would you attend their graduation ceremonies? Of course. Even if their graduation conflicted with important client meetings? Victoria's jaw tightened. That's not a fair comparison. Why not? Because attending a graduation is a few hours out of one day. Building a business requires sustained focus and commitment over years. So you understand why I made the choices I made? I understand them intellectually. But understanding doesn't erase the emotional impact of feeling like your mother's work was more important than your milestones. Fair enough, I could understand that. The intellectual understanding of necessity didn't diminish the emotional experience of feeling overlooked. Victoria, if I agree to your partnership proposal, what role would you want your daughters to play in the business? Eventually? If they're interested and qualified, they could certainly be part of the succession planning conversation. And if they're not interested, Then we'd develop other succession strategies, such as professional management, employee ownership, strategic sale to aligned buyers. There are lots of options for family businesses. Professional management, employee ownership, strategic sale. All the options that ended with the Blackwood name being removed from Blackwood Estate. Victoria, what makes you think I want to discuss succession at all? The question seemed to catch her off guard again. Well, estate planning is just responsible business practice. For whom? For you. For me. For your granddaughters. For the employees who depend on this business for their livelihoods. So everyone except me has a stake in my succession planning? Of course you have a stake. You have the biggest stake. But that stake includes responsibility to ensure continuity and sustainability. Responsibility to ensure continuity and sustainability. She was making my reluctance to discuss succession sound like irresponsible selfishness. Pas possible? I walked back to the windows overlooking the vineyard. Carlos was now directing the crew toward the Cabernet blocks on the eastern slope. These were the vines we'd planted in 2003 that were just now reaching their prime production years. 20-year-old vines that would continue improving for another decade or more if properly managed. Everything about wine was long-term. The decisions I made today would affect vintages that wouldn't be released for years. The vineyard management practices we implemented now would determine grape quality for decades. The customer relationships we built this season would influence sales for generations. Victoria was thinking in corporate consulting timeframes. Quarterly reports, annual strategic plans, 5-year projections. But wine operated on geological time, generational time, legacy time. Victoria, let me tell you what I've spent the last 5 years preparing for, I said without turning around. I could hear her shifting in her chair. She was probably organizing her legal documents, preparing for what she thought would be my capitulation to her succession planning arguments. I've been preparing for exactly this conversation, I continued, for the day you'd return with legal briefcases and corporate proposals and partnership agreements. You've been expecting me? I've been expecting someone. You, or lawyers representing you, or consultants you'd hired to evaluate the estate's value. I knew that eventually, someone would come asking questions about inheritance and succession and estate planning. So you understand why we need to have these discussions? I turned back to face her. I understand why you think we need to have these discussions, but Victoria, there's something you don't know about the estate's current structure. What do you mean? I walked to my desk in the corner of the tasting room. I pulled out a manila folder that looked remarkably similar to the one Victoria had brought. I mean that 5 years ago, I restructured Blackwood Estate's ownership in ways that make your partnership proposal complicated. Victoria's confident expression wavered slightly. What kind of restructuring? The kind that ensures this estate will never be subject to hostile takeovers, family disputes, or succession battles. I spread my own legal documents across the tasting bar, right next to hers. 5 years ago, I transferred 60% of Blackwood Estate into an irrevocable trust. The trust is managed by a board of trustees that includes my vineyard manager, my winemaker, our head of sales, and 2 independent wine industry professionals. Victoria stared at the documents. What does that mean? It means that even if something happens to me tomorrow, the estate will continue operating under the guidance of people who understand wine, not corporate consulting. It means the trust beneficiaries are my employees, not my heirs. Beneficiaries? Carlos, our vineyard manager, has been working here for 15 years. He knows every vine, every soil condition, every microclimate variation on the property. Maria, our head winemaker, has been developing our signature blends for 12 years. James, our sales director, has built relationships with distributors and customers across the country for 8 years. Victoria's face was pale. You're leaving the business to your employees? I'm ensuring the business continues under the leadership of people who've earned the right to run it through years of dedicated service and demonstrated expertise. What about family? What about me? What about your granddaughters? What about you? I asked. You've been absent for 23 years. You know nothing about wine production, vineyard management, or the relationships that sustain this business. Why would I leave it to you instead of the people who've helped me build it? Because I'm your daughter. Victoria, being my daughter gives you the right to reconciliation, forgiveness, and a place in my life. It doesn't give you the right to inherit a business you've never contributed to. Victoria stared at me in shock. You're seriously telling me that you've cut your own family out of your estate planning? I'm telling you that I've structured my estate planning to prioritize the business's long-term success over family entitlement. But the remaining 40%? You still own 40%? I own 40% until my death, at which point it transfers to the trust as well. So there's nothing for me? Nothing for my daughters? There's a personal inheritance separate from the business. A trust fund that will provide comfortable financial security for you and your daughters. But the business itself? No, that stays with the people who understand it. Victoria was speechless. She stared at the legal documents spread across the tasting bar as if they were written in a foreign language. You planned this, she said finally. You actually planned to cut me out. I planned to protect what I built, I said, from exactly this scenario. From someone showing up after decades of absence with partnership proposals and succession plans. Someone? I'm not someone. I'm your daughter. Victoria, you stopped being my daughter the day you walked out and refused all contact for 23 years. That's not… Victoria struggled for words. People grow apart. Families have conflicts. That doesn't mean you disown them permanently. It does when they only return when there's money involved. Victoria's face flushed with anger. That's not why I'm here. Isn't it? When did you start researching the estate's finances? When did you hire lawyers to draft partnership agreements? When did you begin planning this reunion? Victoria didn't answer. I'll tell you when, I continued. 18 months ago. Right after Forbes published that article about successful women-owned businesses in Napa Valley. Right after they estimated Blackwood Estate's value at $200 million. The color drained from Victoria's face. How do you know that? Because I've been watching you just as carefully as you've been watching me. My private investigator has been tracking your activity since the day you started asking questions about my business structure. You hired a private investigator? I hired protection. Someone to monitor threats to everything I've built, including threats from family members who might decide they deserved a piece of it. Victoria stood up abruptly. This is insane. You're treating me like some kind of criminal. I'm treating you like someone who disappeared for 23 years and returned with legal documents. What did you expect? I expected. Victoria's voice trailed off. What? You expected me to be grateful? You expected me to hand over half my company because you finally decided I was worth talking to? Victoria's shoulders sagged. For the first time since she'd walked into my tasting room, she looked defeated. I expected you to want me back in your life. Then you should have come back with an apology, not a business plan. The business plan was supposed to be a bridge, a way for us to reconnect while building something together. Victoria, we could have built something together 24 years ago when I started this place. You could have been part of every decision, every challenge, every success. Instead, you chose to leave. I was 22 years old, and I was 47, starting over with nothing after your father left. Do you know how terrifying that was? Do you know how much I needed support from the one person I thought would always be on my side? Victoria looked genuinely shocked. I didn't know you needed me. You seemed so strong, so determined, like you had everything under control. I was barely holding it together, but I couldn't let you see that because I needed you to believe we were going to be okay. So you pushed me away? I worked 18-hour days to make sure we'd survive. There's a difference. Victoria sat back down heavily. I didn't understand any of that then. And you don't understand any of it now. You think this business is about revenue metrics and growth strategies. You think success means maximizing value and expanding market share. You have no idea what it actually took to build this place. Then tell me, Victoria said quietly. Help me understand. I looked at my daughter across the tasting bar that represented 24 years of choices, sacrifices, and determination. She looked smaller now, less corporate, more human. but it was too late for understanding. Victoria, some stories can't be told. They have to be lived. And you chose not to live this one with me. But I'm here now. You're here now. Because there's something to claim. Where were you when I was failing? Where were you when I was struggling? Where were you when I needed someone to believe in what I was trying to build? Victoria had no answer for that. I'll have my lawyer send you the details of your personal inheritance, I said. It's generous, more than generous. Your daughters will be able to attend any college they choose. You'll never have to worry about money. But not the business. Not the business. Victoria gathered her legal documents slowly, mechanically. Her corporate confidence had completely evaporated. What if I contest the trust? What if I challenge your estate planning in court? Then you'll lose your personal inheritance as well. The trust documents include a no contest clause. Anyone who challenges the structure forfeits all benefits. Victoria stared at me. You really did think of everything. I had 5 years to plan for this conversation. I used them well. Victoria stood up and closed her briefcase. So that's it. I came here hoping for reconciliation and partnership, and I'm leaving with nothing but a trust fund payment? You're leaving with exactly what you brought. Nothing. You brought no relationship, no history, no investment in this business. Why would you leave with anything more? Because I'm your daughter. Victoria, my daughter left 23 years ago. You're just someone who shares her DNA. The words were harsh, but they were true. The woman standing in my tasting room was a stranger to me. An accomplished, successful stranger, but a stranger nonetheless. Victoria walked toward the door, then stopped. For what it's worth, I really did want to reconnect. The business opportunity was secondary. No, it wasn't. How can you be so sure? Because if you'd wanted to reconnect, you would have called on my birthday. You would have sent a Christmas card. You would have reached out when you got married, when your daughters were born, when you achieved your first promotion. You would have found a way to rebuild our relationship that didn't involve asking for half my company. Victoria opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. She had no argument for that logic. Goodbye, Victoria. Goodbye, Mother. She walked out of my tasting room and out of my life, just as she had 23 years ago. This time, I was ready for it. Huage. I walked back to the windows overlooking the vineyard. Carlos and his crew were finishing their morning work on the eastern slope. Soon they'd move to the western blocks, where the afternoon sun would provide perfect conditions for pruning the younger vines. Everything would continue exactly as it had before Victoria's visit. The grapes would ripen, the harvest would happen, the wine would age in barrels hand-selected from French cooperages. Customers would drive up from San Francisco and fly in from around the world to taste what we'd created. And when I was gone, Carlos and Maria and James and the others would continue the work we'd started together. People who understood wine. People who'd earned their positions through dedication and expertise. People who saw Blackwood Estate as more than a business opportunity. Who is? My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Carlos. Saw someone leaving with a briefcase. Everything okay? I smiled and typed back. Everything's perfect. Just someone who got lost, looking for an opportunity that doesn't exist here. The sun was higher now, warming the tasting room and highlighting the crystal chandelier that cast rainbow patterns across the marble floor. In a few hours, our first visitors would arrive for their scheduled tastings. They'd sample our wines, ask questions about our methods, and hopefully leave with bottles that would remind them of their visit to Blackwood Estate. None of them would know about Victoria's visit. None of them would care about family drama or succession planning or corporate partnership proposals. They'd care about the wine, the experience, and the story we told through every bottle we produced. That was exactly how it should be. I poured myself one more cup of coffee and settled into my favorite chair overlooking the vineyard. There was work to do. There was always work to do. But for now, I wanted to savor the morning quiet and the satisfaction of a confrontation that had gone exactly as I'd planned. After decades of silence, my daughter had finally shown up to steal everything, and I had been ready. Now let me take you back to where this story really began. Not to 23 years ago when Victoria left. Not even to 24 years ago when I founded Blackwood Estate. but to 48 years ago, when I was 22 years old and had absolutely nothing. The year was 1975. I was Margaret Chen then, not Margaret Blackwood. A 22-year-old college dropout with a philosophy degree that was about as useful as a chocolate teapot. I was living in a studio apartment in Berkeley that was smaller than most people's closets. The rent was $180 a month. Even that was a stretch on my waitressing salary. I worked at a diner called Mel's on Telegraph Avenue, the kind of place where the coffee was always burnt and the customers were always complaining. I made $2.30 an hour plus tips. On a good night, I might take home $25. On a bad night, I'd be lucky to cover bus fare home. My big dream was to save enough money to go back to school. Maybe get a teaching credential. Maybe become a social worker. Something respectable and stable. Something my parents would approve of. My parents had immigrated from Taiwan when I was 5. They'd sacrificed everything for the American dream. They worked 16-hour days at their small grocery store in Chinatown. They saved every penny so I could go to UC Berkeley and become someone important. Instead, I dropped out after 3 years to follow a boy named Robert Blackwood. Robert was everything my parents feared in a boyfriend: charming, unreliable, and completely uninterested in traditional success. He was studying art history when I met him. He talked about traveling through Europe, visiting vineyards, learning about wine culture. He made it sound romantic and adventurous. My parents called him that worthless white boy. They weren't entirely wrong. When Robert decided to drop out and move to Napa Valley to work harvest season at a winery, I went with him. My parents were devastated. We had a screaming fight in Mandarin and English that ended with my father saying I was no longer his daughter. "You throw away everything we built for you," he said. "For what?" "For some boy who will leave you when he gets bored?" I was young and in love, and convinced that passion was more important than practical concerns. I told my parents they didn't understand true love. I told them Robert and I were going to build something beautiful together. Saves. I was an idiot. Chumhol. Robert and I moved to a tiny cottage in St. Helena. It was owned by the winery where he'd gotten a job as a cellar worker. The cottage had 1 bedroom, a kitchenette, and a bathroom with plumbing that worked only when it felt like it. The rent was $150 a month, which was cheap even then. I got a job at a local restaurant called Auberge du Soleil. It was fancy by Napa standards. Rich tourists from San Francisco would drive up for weekend wine tastings and elaborate dinners. I waited tables and learned about wine by listening to conversations between customers and sommeliers. For the first time in my life, I was fascinated by something academic. Wine wasn't just alcohol. It was history, chemistry, geography, and artistry all combined. Every bottle told a story about soil, climate, and human decision-making. I started reading everything I could find about viticulture and winemaking. I bought books with my tip money. I took notes during slow shifts. I asked questions of every winemaker who came into the restaurant. Robert thought my interest was cute but impractical. "You can't just read your way into the wine business," he'd say. "You need connections, capital, and generations of family tradition." He was probably right. But I couldn't stop learning. In 1976, Robert got promoted to assistant winemaker at the vineyard where he worked. His salary went from $800 a month to $1,200 a month. We felt rich. We started talking about getting married, buying a house, starting a family. Word. That's when I got pregnant with Victoria. Victoria was born on March 15, 1977. A beautiful, healthy baby girl with my dark hair and Robert's green eyes. I was 24 years old and had no idea what I was doing. Robert was initially excited about being a father. He talked about teaching Victoria to appreciate wine, taking her on trips to European vineyards, showing her the romantic side of agricultural life. Welcome, the reality was different. Babies cry at night. They need constant attention. They make it impossible to work restaurant shifts that run until midnight. I had to quit my job at Auberge du Soleil because we couldn't afford childcare. We were living on Robert's salary alone. $1,200 a month had felt generous for 2 people. For a family of 3, it was barely survival. Robert started working longer hours to earn overtime pay. He'd leave at 6 a.m., and come home at 9 p.m., exhausted and covered in grape stains. When he was home, he was too tired to help with Victoria or household responsibilities. I was alone with a baby for 15 hours a day in a cottage with no air conditioning, unreliable plumbing, and neighbors who complained when Victoria cried. I was going stir-crazy. But I was also falling in love with motherhood in ways I hadn't expected. Victoria was brilliant and curious and incredibly alert. Even as a baby, she seemed to absorb everything around her. She'd watch me with these intense green eyes, like she was trying to figure out how the world worked. I started talking to her constantly. About wine, about books, about my dreams for the future. She couldn't understand the words, but she seemed to enjoy the sound of my voice. "Someday, Victoria," I'd tell her while rocking her to sleep, "we're going to build something amazing together. Something that belongs to us." I had no idea what that something would be. In late 1977, the winery where Robert worked got sold to a large corporation. The new owners brought in their own management team. Robert's position was eliminated. We had 2 weeks' notice and $300 in savings. Robert was devastated. He'd thought his job was secure. He'd been planning to ask for another promotion. Instead, he was unemployed in an industry where positions were scarce and competition was fierce. "We'll have to move back to Berkeley," he said. "I can probably get my old job at the bookstore. You can go back to waiting tables." Moving back to Berkeley meant admitting failure. It meant giving up on the wine country dream. It meant returning to the same kind of minimum wage jobs we'd left behind. But it also meant stability, regular paychecks, affordable rent, proximity to my parents, who might be willing to help with childcare despite their disapproval of my life choices. I was preparing to pack our belongings when I saw the newspaper ad that changed everything. Small vineyard for sale, 40 acres, Napa Valley, owner financing available. The price was $85,000. We had $300. But something about the ad compelled me to call the number. The vineyard was owned by an old man named Giuseppe Romano. He was 83 years old and had been trying to make wine for 15 years. He was failing spectacularly. Giuseppe had bought the land in 1963 with romantic ideas about becoming a California winemaker. He'd planted vines without understanding soil composition, drainage, or microclimate considerations. He'd built a winery without permits or proper ventilation. He'd tried to market his wine without understanding distribution or customer preferences. By 1978, he was $200,000 in debt and desperate to get out. "I love the land," he told Robert and me during our first visit, "but I'm too old to fix my mistakes. I need someone young and energetic to take over." The vineyard was a disaster. Half the vines were diseased. The winery building was structurally unsound. The equipment was outdated and poorly maintained. Any rational person would have walked away immediately. But I could see the potential. The land was beautiful. The location was excellent. The soil, underneath years of neglect, was rich and well-drained. With proper management, this could become something special. "How much would you need for a down payment?" I asked Giuseppe. $10,000, he said. "I'll carry the rest of the note at 8% interest." $10,000 might as well have been $10 million. We didn't have it. We had no way to get it. Banks wouldn't lend to unemployed 25-year-olds with no collateral. But Giuseppe was desperate too. After an hour of conversation, he agreed to accept $5,000 down with the first payment not due until harvest season. We still didn't have $5,000. But we had something almost as valuable. We had youth, energy, and the desperation that comes from having no other options. I convinced Robert that we should take over Giuseppe's vineyard. Not because it made financial sense, not because we had a clear plan for success, but because it was our only chance to build something that belonged to us. "Margaret, we don't know anything about running a winery," Robert protested. "We don't have money, equipment, or business experience." "We can learn," I said. "We're both smart. We're both willing to work hard." How different can it be from working for someone else? Very different, as it turned out. But in January 1979, I was too young and too optimistic to understand the challenges ahead. I was also too proud to admit that moving back to Berkeley might be the sensible choice. We used our last $300 to buy gas, food, and basic supplies. Giuseppe agreed to let us live in the old farmhouse on the property rent-free in exchange for maintaining the grounds. The farmhouse was even worse than our cottage in St. Helena. It had been empty for 2 years. Mice had moved in. The roof leaked. The heating system didn't work. The kitchen had no refrigerator and a stove that produced more smoke than heat. But it was ours. Or at least, it would be ours if we could figure out how to make it successful. Victoria was almost 2 years old when we moved to the vineyard. She toddled around the property like she owned it, picking up interesting rocks and chasing butterflies. She seemed to love the space and freedom after being confined to small apartments for most of her life. "This is home now, Victoria," I told her as we explored the vine rows for the first time. "We're gonna make this place beautiful." Reality hit hard in March 1979. Giuseppe's books were even worse than his vineyard management. He owed money to suppliers, contractors, the county tax assessor, and the state agricultural department. Some debts were in collections. Others carried penalty interest rates. The total debt load was closer to $250,000 than the $200,000 Giuseppe had mentioned. Our monthly payments to him were just the beginning. We also owed back taxes, equipment loans, and supplier payments. "We're bankrupt before we start," Robert said after reviewing the financial records. "We should walk away now before we get in deeper." Walking away meant losing our $300 deposit and returning to unemployment with a toddler to support. Staying meant taking on debts that could crush us financially for decades. Although, I chose to stay, not because it was rational, but because I couldn't bear the thought of giving up on the only dream that had ever felt truly mine. The first year was brutal. I knew nothing about vineyard management, but I couldn't afford to hire experienced help. I bought books on viticulture and tried to implement textbook solutions to real-world problems. The existing vines were infected with phylloxera, a root-eating pest that could destroy entire vineyards. The proper solution was to replant with resistant rootstock. That would cost $30,000 and eliminate income for 3 years while new vines matured. I couldn't afford proper solutions. I had to find cheap alternatives that might work long enough to generate revenue. I spent $200 on nematicide treatments that would slow the phylloxera damage. I pruned infected vines aggressively to redirect energy into healthy growth. I hand-watered struggling plants and applied homemade compost to improve soil nutrition. Robert helped when he could, but he was working construction jobs during the day to pay for basic living expenses. He'd come home exhausted and covered in dust, only to find me in the vineyard with Victoria strapped to my back, trying to repair irrigation lines by flashlight. "This is insane, Margaret," he'd say. "You can't save this place by yourself." Maybe he was right, but I couldn't stop trying. Victoria was my constant companion during those long days in the vineyard. She'd nap in a portable crib I set up under shade trees. When she was awake, she'd play with pruning shears, safely closed, taste grapes, and help me pull weeds. "Mama working," she'd announce to anyone who visited. "Victoria helping." She was helping, in her own way. Having her with me made the isolation and uncertainty bearable. She was a reminder of why I couldn't give up. By harvest season, I'd managed to keep about half the vineyard producing usable grapes. The yield was small, maybe 3 tons total, but the quality was surprisingly good. I had no idea how to make wine. Giuseppe's equipment was functional but outdated. I'd read books about fermentation and aging, but theoretical knowledge was very different from practical application. Had decided to start simple. Crush the grapes, add yeast, let fermentation happen, and hope for the best. The crushing went well. The fermentation started properly. For 2 weeks, everything seemed to be working according to plan. Then the temperature dropped unexpectedly, and fermentation stopped completely. I had 500 gallons of grape juice that was turning into vinegar instead of wine. And I called every winemaker I'd met during my restaurant days. Most were too busy with their own harvest to help. But one, a woman named Catherine Martinez who ran a small operation in Sonoma, agreed to drive over and assess the situation. "Your fermentation stuck because of temperature shock," she explained after testing the must. "You need to restart it with a different yeast strain and temperature-controlled environment." "How do I do that?" I asked. "You need proper fermentation tanks with temperature controls." That's about $10,000 minimum. I didn't have $10,000. I had about $50 in cash and a barn full of souring grape juice. Catherine looked around the makeshift winery, then at Victoria playing with empty wine bottles in the corner. "You know what?" she said finally. "I'll help you save this batch. But you owe me a favor in the future." She spent the next 3 days at our vineyard, bringing proper yeast, testing equipment, and expertise. She showed me how to restart fermentation using a technique called co-fermentation with healthy wine from her own operation. "Why are you helping me?" I asked on the 3rd day. "Because I remember what it felt like to be completely in over my head," Catherine said. "Someone helped me when I was desperate. Now I'm helping you." That act of kindness saved my first vintage. More importantly, it taught me that the wine industry was full of people willing to share knowledge with anyone willing to learn. The wine Catherine helped me save wasn't great, but it was drinkable. I had 400 bottles of basic red table wine that tasted like wine made by someone who didn't know what she was doing. I needed to sell it quickly to generate cash for spring vineyard expenses. But I had no distribution network, no marketing experience, and no reputation. I loaded Victoria into our old pickup truck and drove to every restaurant, wine shop, and tasting room in Napa Valley. Most places wouldn't even taste my wine. Those that did were politely dismissive. "This is very rustic," one buyer told me. "Maybe try the farmer's market?" The farmer's market turned out to be excellent advice. At the St. Helena Farmer's Market, I met customers who cared more about supporting local agriculture than wine sophistication. "One more year," I pleaded. "Give me one more year to prove this can work." "You said that last year, and the year before that." Robert took the job in Sonoma. He asked me to come with him. He promised we could rent a nice apartment, have normal lives, give Victoria stability and security. The choice was simple: follow my husband to a stable life, or stay with my vines and risk losing everything. I chose the vines. Robert left in January 1983. He didn't abandon Victoria and me completely. He sent child support when he could and visited every few weeks. But the daily partnership was over. I was now a single mother running a failing vineyard with a 5-year-old daughter who asked constantly when Daddy was coming home. "Daddy has a new job," I'd explain. "But we're staying here because this is our home." "Why can't we go with Daddy?" "Because Mama has work to do here. Important work that will help us have a better life someday." Victoria accepted this explanation with the resilience of childhood, but I could see the confusion and disappointment in her eyes. She'd lost the security of having 2 parents present and gained a mother who was even more focused on work than before. The practical challenges were enormous. I couldn't afford childcare, so Victoria came with me everywhere. Vineyard work, wine tastings, farmers markets, equipment repairs. Victoria was my constant companion. Some customers found this charming. "Look at the little winemaker," they'd say, when Victoria helped me pour samples at tastings. Other customers found it unprofessional. I lost several potential restaurant accounts because buyers thought bringing a child to business meetings was inappropriate. But I had no choice. It was either bring Victoria with me or stop working entirely. Stopping work meant losing the vineyard and everything I'd invested in it. Fortunately, the local wine community was more supportive than I'd expected. Catherine Martinez, who'd helped save my first vintage, introduced me to other women in the industry who understood the challenges of combining motherhood with winemaking. "We have to help each other," Catherine said. "The wine business is still dominated by men who inherited their operations from their fathers. Those of us building from scratch need to stick together." Catherine's network included women like Maria Santos, who ran a small organic vineyard, and Jennifer Kim, who'd started a wine marketing company. They shared practical advice, loaned equipment, and occasionally watched Victoria when I had critical work that required adult-only environments. More importantly, they believed in what I was trying to accomplish. When local bank loans were denied, which happened frequently, they helped me find alternative financing. When suppliers demanded cash payments I couldn't afford, they co-signed orders or provided references. "You're going to make it," Maria told me during a particularly difficult period in 1984. "Your wine is getting better every year. Your customer base is growing. You just need to survive long enough for success to catch up with your efforts. Surviving was the operative word. Some months, I had to choose between paying the electricity bill and buying supplies for the next vintage. Some weeks, Victoria and I lived on peanut butter sandwiches because that's all we could afford. But we were surviving. The vineyard was producing better grapes each year. The wine quality was improving dramatically. Sales were growing from hundreds of bottles annually to thousands. By age 7, Victoria had become genuinely useful around the vineyard. She could identify ripe grapes, spot pest problems, and help with simple cellar tasks like cleaning equipment and organizing supplies. More importantly, she'd developed a sophisticated palate for someone her age. She could taste differences between vineyard blocks, identify off flavors in fermenting wine, and predict which barrels would produce the best final blends. Victoria has natural talent, Catherine observed during one of her visits. She understands wine intuitively. This talent made Victoria feel important and included, rather than burdened by our unusual lifestyle. Instead of resenting the vineyard for taking her mother's attention, she began to see it as something we were building together. "Mama, when I grow up, I want to make wine too," Victoria announced one day while we were sampling barrel lots. "You can do anything you want when you grow up," I told her. "You can be a doctor, a teacher, a lawyer, anything that makes you happy. I want to make wine with you." "You made this yourself?" asked my first customer, a retired teacher named Helen Walsh. "How wonderful. I'll take 2 bottles." Helen's enthusiasm was infectious. Other customers stopped by to hear about the young woman trying to save a failed vineyard. Some bought wine out of curiosity, others bought it out of sympathy. By the end of the day, I'd sold 20 bottles at $8 each. $160 might not sound like much, but it represented hope. Proof that people would pay money for something I'd created. Polofal. More importantly, several customers asked if I'd be at the market the following week. I was building a customer base 1 bottle at a time, near finance. The second year was marginally less chaotic than the first. I'd learned enough to avoid some obvious mistakes. I'd also learned enough to recognize how much I still didn't know. Victoria was now 3 years old and increasingly independent. She could walk the vineyard rows without supervision, understood basic safety rules around equipment, and had strong opinions about grape quality. "These grapes yucky, Mama," she'd announce, pointing to clusters with obvious defects. "These grapes good." Her palate was surprisingly accurate. Children's taste buds are more sensitive to flaws that adults learn to ignore. Victoria became my unofficial quality control assistant. Robert was becoming less enthusiastic about vineyard life. The work was physically demanding, financially unrewarding, and socially isolating. His friends from the wine industry had moved on to stable jobs with regular paychecks. We were still living hand-to-mouth with no clear path to prosperity. "How long are we going to keep doing this?" he asked one evening after a particularly difficult day trying to repair our ancient tractor. "Until we succeed," I said. "What if we never succeed?" I didn't have a good answer for that question, but I knew I wasn't ready to give up yet. The second harvest went much better than the first. I'd learned temperature control techniques and invested in used fermentation equipment. The wine was still basic, but it was intentionally basic rather than accidentally awful. I also expanded beyond farmers markets. A few local restaurants agreed to serve my wine by the glass. A small wine shop in St. Helena put my bottles on their local discovery shelf. Sales were still tiny, maybe $3,000 total for the year, but they were growing. More importantly, I was developing repeat customers who looked forward to trying each new vintage. By 1981, the vineyard was consuming every aspect of my life. I worked from dawn to dusk 7 days a week. When I wasn't in the vineyard, I was making wine, maintaining equipment, or selling bottles at markets and restaurants. Robert felt neglected. Victoria felt neglected. I felt overwhelmed but couldn't figure out how to balance family needs with business demands. "You care more about those vines than you do about us," Robert said during one of our increasingly frequent arguments. "I'm doing this for us," I replied. "For our future. For Victoria's future. Victoria needs a mother who's present, not a mother who's building some fantasy business that might never succeed." He wasn't wrong about my priorities. I was obsessed with the vineyard in ways that probably weren't healthy. But I was also terrified that any reduction in effort would lead to failure. The vineyard was still losing money. Our debts were growing faster than our income. We were behind on payments to Giuseppe and couldn't afford basic maintenance on equipment or property. But wine quality was improving. Customer loyalty was growing. Industry professionals were starting to take notice of the, quote, young woman making interesting wine in the old Romano place. I could feel we were on the verge of something significant. I just needed more time, more focus, more commitment. Robert needed the opposite. He needed less uncertainty, less financial stress, less competition with grapevines for my attention. The crisis came during harvest season 1982. Robert had been offered a job managing a tasting room for an established winery in Sonoma. Good salary, regular hours, health insurance, and a clear career path. I want to take it, he told me. It's time to be realistic about our situation. We can't leave now, I said. This is our best harvest yet. The wine is going to be excellent. We're finally building momentum. Margaret, we're $50,000 in debt. Our truck is falling apart. Victoria needs new clothes and dental care. We can't keep living like this. The idea that Victoria might want to continue what I was building gave me hope during the darkest financial periods. Maybe the sacrifices would be worth it. Maybe Victoria would inherit something valuable rather than just memories of hardship. 1985 was the year everything started to change. The wine I'd made from the 1983 harvest, my third vintage, won a bronze medal at the Sonoma County Wine Competition. It was a small award from a regional competition, but it was my first official recognition from industry professionals. The medal gave me credibility with buyers who'd been skeptical of wine made by an unknown woman in a converted barn. More importantly, the medal gave me confidence. For the first time, I had objective proof that my wine was genuinely good, not just acceptable to sympathetic farmers market customers. Sales doubled within 6 months of the award announcement. Restaurants that had previously ignored my wines suddenly wanted to meet. Wine shops requested larger orders. Tasting room visitors specifically asked for the medal-winning wine from the woman winemaker. I raised my prices from $8 per bottle to $12 per bottle. To my surprise, customers paid without complaint. Quality wine could command quality prices, even from unknown producers. The additional revenue allowed me to catch up on overdue bills, invest in better equipment, and hire part-time help during harvest season. For the first time since buying the vineyard, I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck. Nero's success created new challenges. Demand for my wine was growing faster than my ability to produce it. I was selling every bottle I made within weeks of release, often to customers who'd driven directly to the vineyard after hearing recommendations from friends. The old Romano equipment wasn't sufficient for increased production. I needed larger fermentation tanks, better temperature controls, and proper aging facilities. The investments required were substantial, $50,000 minimum, but necessary for maintaining quality while increasing volume. Banks were still reluctant to lend money to a single mother with limited collateral. But my improving financial statements and growing reputation made alternative financing possible. Catherine Martinez introduced me to a group of investors who specialized in supporting women-owned businesses. They agreed to loan me $75,000 at favorable terms in exchange for purchasing exclusive distribution rights in certain territories. "This is your growth capital," explained the lead investor, a woman named Patricia Wong, who'd built her own successful import business. "Use it wisely, and you'll have the foundation for long-term success." I used the money to completely modernize the winery. New tanks, new barrels, new bottling equipment, and proper climate control systems. The improvements allowed me to double production while maintaining the hands-on quality approach that had earned the bronze medal. Victoria, now 9 years old, was fascinated by the construction and new equipment. She understood that the investments represented confidence in our future success. "Are we rich now, Mama?" she asked while watching workers install the new fermentation tanks. "We're not rich," I told her, "but we're building something that might make us successful someday." "What's the difference?" "Rich people have money. Successful people have built something valuable that will last." The 1985 vintage wine, made with grapes grown using improved vineyard management and fermented in new equipment, won a gold medal at the California State Fair wine competition. Gold medals were serious recognition. They indicated wine quality comparable to established premium producers. They also generated significant media attention. Wine and Spirits magazine wrote a profile titled "Rising Star: Margaret Blackwood's Remarkable Transformation of a Failed Vineyard." Food and Wine included my Cabernet Sauvignon in their Best Wines Under $20 feature. The publicity brought customers from around the country. People drove from Los Angeles, flew in from New York, and ordered wine by mail from states I'd never visited. By late 1987, I had a waiting list for new releases. Restaurants were competing for allocation of limited production wines. Wine collectors were buying multiple cases for long-term cellaring. Autre times trites. "You've created something special here," said James Morton, a wine writer for the San Francisco Chronicle. "This estate is producing wines that rival the best in Napa Valley." The validation was gratifying, but it also created pressure. Success meant higher expectations from customers, critics, and competitors. Every vintage would be compared to previous achievements. By Victoria's 11th birthday in March 1988, Blackwood Estate had become everything I'd dreamed of during those desperate early years. We were producing 5,000 cases annually of consistently excellent wine. Our customer base included restaurants, wine shops, and collectors throughout California and beyond. More importantly, we'd achieved financial stability. The vineyard was generating enough profit to cover all expenses, service our debt, and invest in continued improvements. Victoria and I lived comfortably without the constant anxiety about paying bills that had defined our first decade. Victoria had grown up understanding that success required work, patience, and persistence. She'd seen me make countless sacrifices to build something valuable. She'd also benefited from the opportunities that success created. "I'm proud of you, Mama," Victoria said on the evening of her birthday as we walked through the vineyard rows that had become home. "You made our dreams come true." "We made our dreams come true," I corrected her. "This belongs to both of us." I meant it. Everything I'd built was intended to create opportunities for Victoria that I'd never had. Security, education, independence, and the confidence that comes from owning something valuable. What I didn't anticipate was that Victoria might not want the opportunities I'd created for her. Even during those successful years, there were signs that Victoria and I had different ideas about the future. She enjoyed the vineyard and understood the wine business, but she was also curious about the wider world beyond Napa Valley. "Do you think I could go to college in New York?" she asked during her junior year of high school. "You can go to college anywhere you want," I told her. "Stanford, Harvard, Columbia, you're smart enough for any school." "What about after college? Could I work in New York for a while before coming back to help with the vineyard?" The question contained an assumption that concerned me. Victoria assumed she'd eventually return to work at Blackwood Estate. But she also assumed she'd leave first to explore other possibilities. "Of course you can work anywhere you want," I said. "But Victoria, remember that Blackwood Estate will need leadership someday. Someone who understands the business and cares about maintaining what we've built." "I know, Mama. I just want to see what else is out there before I commit to spending my whole life here." See what else is out there. The phrase that would eventually lead to 23 years of silence and the confrontation in my tasting room that morning. But in 1988, I thought Victoria's curiosity was normal teenage exploration. I thought she'd discover that the wider world was less satisfying than the vineyard we'd built together. Nudie. I was wrong about a lot of things. By 1988, Blackwood Estate was generating real money for the first time. Not just survival money. Not just paying the bills money. Real profit that could fund expansion, improvements, and the kind of life I'd dreamed about during those desperate early years. Victoria was 11 years old and had never known poverty. She'd grown up watching our success grow year by year. To her, business growth was normal. Financial security was expected. The vineyard was just home, not the miracle of determination and luck that I knew it to be. Success in the wine business creates its own momentum. Good reviews lead to more customers. More customers lead to higher prices. Higher prices lead to better profit margins. Better profit margins lead to investment capital for expansion. By late 1988, I was selling every bottle we produced within weeks of release. Restaurants were calling monthly asking for larger allocations. Wine shops were requesting exclusive regional partnerships. Collectors were buying cases for long-term cellaring. The limiting factor was production capacity. Our vineyard could support maybe 8,000 cases annually, with optimal management. I was already at 5,000 cases and could reasonably increase to 6,000 without compromising quality. But demand was approaching 10,000 cases annually. I was turning away potential customers every month. "You need to expand," advised Patricia Wong during one of her quarterly investor check-ins. "Either increase vineyard acreage or establish contracts with other premium growers." Vineyard expansion was expensive and slow. Good Napa Valley land cost $50,000 per acre minimum. New plantings wouldn't produce usable grapes for 4 years. I'd need to invest $500,000 immediately for revenue that wouldn't materialize until the mid-1990s. Contract growers were faster but riskier. I'd be dependent on other people's farming decisions for grape quality. One bad harvest from a contract vineyard could damage our reputation permanently. Kaika Pilas. I chose a hybrid approach. I purchased an adjacent 60-acre parcel that had been planted with inferior grape varieties. The land cost $180,000. Replanting with premium varietals would cost another $120,000. But I'd own the land and control every aspect of production. "That's a big investment, Mama," Victoria observed as we walked the new property for the first time. "What if something goes wrong?" "Something could always go wrong," I told her. "But if we don't take calculated risks, we'll never grow beyond where we are now. Do you want to grow beyond where we are now?" It was a perceptive question from an 11-year-old. We were already successful. We had financial security, industry recognition, and a beautiful home on prime vineyard land. Growth meant taking on debt, increasing complexity, and risking what we'd already built. "I want to build something that will last for generations," I explained. "Something big enough to support multiple families, provide jobs for many people, and become a permanent part of Napa Valley history." "Will I be part of running it when I grow up?" "If you want to be. But only if you want to be." I meant that sincerely. I never wanted Victoria to feel trapped by expectations the way I'd felt trapped by my parents' dreams of academic success. If she chose a different path, I'd support her completely. But I secretly hoped she'd choose to continue what we were building together. As Victoria entered her teenage years, she became increasingly capable and increasingly independent. She could drive tractors, operate bottling equipment, and conduct basic wine tastings for visitors. Her palate had developed to the point where her opinions about blend ratios and aging decisions were genuinely valuable. Drache alaghamza biquid. She was also developing interests beyond the vineyard. She joined the school debate team and discovered she had natural talent for public speaking and logical argument. She started reading voraciously about politics, economics, and social issues. "I want to understand how the world works," she explained when I found her reading books about international trade and corporate finance. "Wine is interesting, but it's just one small part of a much bigger system." Her curiosity was impressive, but it also concerned me. Victoria was beginning to see the vineyard as limiting rather than liberating. She was starting to think about opportunities beyond Napa Valley. "There's nothing wrong with understanding the broader world," I told her. "But remember that success comes from focusing deeply on something you care about, not from sampling everything superficially." "I know, Mama. But how do I know what I care about most if I don't explore different possibilities?" Fair point. I'd been so focused on building the vineyard that I'd never seriously considered alternative careers. Maybe Victoria was wiser to explore before committing. But exploration required time away from the family business. Time when she wouldn't be learning the detailed knowledge that effective vineyard management required. Time when she might discover interests that pulled her away from everything we'd built together. In 1990, Wine Spectator magazine featured Blackwood Estate on their cover, with the headline, "Napa's New Star, Margaret Blackwood's remarkable rise from failed vineyard to premium producer. The article was a detailed profile of our transformation from Giuseppe Romano's disaster into one of Napa Valley's most promising small estates. It included interviews with industry professionals who praised our wine quality, business acumen, and commitment to sustainable farming practices. Margaret Blackwood represents the best of American entrepreneurship, the article concluded. She took enormous risks, worked tirelessly, and created something genuinely special through determination and vision. Well, understanding economics would help with pricing strategies and market analysis. Political science would be useful for navigating regulations and trade policies. Law would be valuable for contracts, land use, and intellectual property issues. Victoria was finding ways to connect her academic interests with the family business. But she was also developing expertise that would make her valuable to any number of organizations beyond Blackwood Estate. Victoria was accepted to Stanford, UC Berkeley, Columbia, and Yale. After much deliberation, she chose Stanford because of their strong economics program and proximity to home. "I can drive up for harvest season and summer work," she explained. "Stanford will give me the best education while keeping me connected to the vineyard." I was relieved by her choice. Stanford was an excellent school, but only 90 minutes from Napa Valley. Victoria could maintain her involvement with the business while pursuing her academic interests. The fall Victoria left for college was emotional for both of us. For 16 years, we'd been partners in building Blackwood Estate. She'd been my constant companion, my sounding board, my motivation for working toward long-term success. Suddenly, I was alone on the vineyard for the first time since 1983. "It's natural to feel empty when children leave for college," Catherine Martinez told me during one of her visits. "But you should be proud of what you've accomplished. Victoria is confident, intelligent, and capable because of the environment you created for her." Catherine was right. Victoria was thriving at Stanford. Her grades were excellent. She was involved in student government and debate competitions. She called home regularly with enthusiasm about her classes and professors. But she was also developing interests and relationships that had nothing to do with wine or Napa Valley. During Victoria's freshman year, she met students from around the world who were planning careers in international business, technology, and finance. She was exposed to professors who discussed global economic trends, emerging markets, and disruptive innovations. "My economics professor worked at the World Bank before teaching," Victoria told me during one of our phone conversations. "She says the most exciting opportunities over the next decade will be in Asia and Latin America." "That's interesting. How does that relate to wine markets?" "Well, China is developing a wealthy middle class that might become interested in premium California wines. And countries like Chile and Argentina are becoming major wine exporters that could compete with Napa Valley." Victoria was thinking about the wine business in global contexts that I'd never considered. Her academic education was providing frameworks for analysis that went far beyond my practical experience. "Are you still planning to major in economics?" I asked. "Economics with a minor in international relations. I'm also thinking about spending a semester abroad, maybe in London or Hong Kong." A semester abroad. More time away from the vineyard. More exposure to career possibilities that didn't involve returning to Napa Valley. "Study abroad would be an excellent experience," I said, trying to sound supportive. "Just remember that harvest season is critical for understanding wine quality decisions." "I know, Mama. I'll make sure any abroad program doesn't conflict with harvest." Victoria was still committed to maintaining her connection with the family business. But that connection was becoming one of many priorities rather than her primary focus. While Victoria was at Stanford, I continued expanding and improving Blackwood Estate operations. The vineyard was now producing 10,000 cases annually of consistently excellent wine. Our customer base included high-end restaurants, premium wine shops, and collectors throughout North America and Europe. I'd also begun offering vineyard tours and private tastings that generated additional revenue while building brand loyalty. Wine tourism was becoming a significant part of Napa Valley's economy, and Blackwood Estate was well positioned to benefit from that trend. "You've built something really special here," said Robert Parker Jr., the influential wine critic, during a visit to evaluate our latest vintage. "Blackwood Estate produces wines that rival the best in Napa Valley while maintaining reasonable prices and authentic hospitality." The Wine Spectator cover story generated national attention. Orders poured in from wine shops and restaurants across the country. Travel writers started including Blackwood Estate in their Napa Valley itineraries. Wine clubs requested exclusive bottlings for their members. Victoria was 13 when the article was published. She was proud of our recognition, but also aware that success came with increased scrutiny and pressure. "Everyone's watching us now," she observed after reading the article. "What if our next vintage isn't as good? What if people expect too much?" "Pressure is the price of success," I told her. "If we weren't successful, nobody would care what we did. The fact that people have high expectations means we've accomplished something meaningful. But doesn't that make it harder to take risks? To try new approaches?" Another perceptive question. Success did create conservative pressure. When you're winning, the temptation is to avoid changes that might disrupt your formula. But wine quality requires constant experimentation and improvement. "We have to be careful not to let success make us complacent," I said. "The day we stop trying to improve is the day we start declining." Victoria nodded, but I could see her processing the implications. Success created obligations and constraints, as well as opportunities. The freedom to experiment had to be balanced against the responsibility to maintain standards. The vineyard expansion I'd started in 1988 began producing usable grapes in 1991. The new plantings yielded smaller quantities than mature vines, but the quality was excellent. Our total production increased from 6,000 cases to 8,000 cases without compromising our premium positioning. More importantly, the additional inventory allowed us to be more selective about distribution. Instead of selling to anyone willing to pay our prices, we could choose retail partners who understood premium wine and provided appropriate presentation. "We're not just selling wine anymore," I explained to Victoria as we reviewed distribution agreements. "We're managing our brand reputation and long-term market position." Victoria was fascinated by the business strategy aspects of wine production. She understood that pricing, packaging, and distribution decisions were as important as winemaking technique for long-term success. "Could we charge more if we produced less?" she asked after reviewing our sales data. "Probably. Scarcity creates value in luxury markets. But we also have obligations to employees, suppliers, and customers who depend on our production volume." So business decisions aren't just about maximizing profit? Business decisions are about balancing multiple competing interests while building something sustainable over decades. These conversations were shaping Victoria's understanding of business responsibility and stakeholder management. I was pleased that she was thinking strategically about complex issues. But I was also aware that strategic thinking might lead her to conclude that the wine business wasn't the optimal use of her talents. Victoria excelled academically throughout high school. She maintained a 4.0 GPA while taking advanced placement courses in history, economics, and literature. Her teachers consistently praised her analytical abilities and communication skills. "Victoria has exceptional potential," her guidance counselor told me during a parent conference. "She could succeed at any university in the country. Have you considered encouraging her to apply to Ivy League schools?" I had mixed feelings about Victoria's academic success. I was proud of her achievements and wanted her to have every possible opportunity. But I also knew that elite universities would expose her to career paths that didn't include returning to Napa Valley. "Where do you want to go to college?" I asked Victoria during her junior year. "I'm thinking about Stanford, UC Berkeley, maybe some East Coast schools like Columbia or Yale. All excellent choices. What do you want to study?" "Economics or political science. Maybe pre-law. I want to understand how institutions work and how policies affect business and society." Economics, political science, pre-law. All fields that would prepare her for careers in consulting, finance, government, or corporate management. None directly related to wine production or vineyard management. "Those are fascinating subjects," I said carefully. "How do you think they might apply to running a wine estate?" Parker's endorsement led to a 95-point score for our 1993 Cabernet Sauvignon and inclusion on his list of outstanding value wines from premium producers. The recognition generated massive demand and allowed us to raise prices significantly. By 1996, Blackwood Estate was generating over $3 million annually in revenue, with profit margins that exceeded 30%. We employed 15 people full-time and 20 additional workers during harvest season. The business had become a significant economic contributor to the local community. Victoria was impressed by our continued growth when she returned for summer work after her sophomore year. "The operation is so much more sophisticated than when I left for college," she observed. "You've really professionalized everything." "Success requires constant improvement," I explained. "We can't rest on past achievements if we want to remain competitive. But don't you ever worry about losing the personal touch that made us special in the first place?" Another insightful question. Growth did create pressure to systematize processes that had previously been handled through personal relationships and intuitive decision-making. "That's why family involvement is so important," I said. "Someone needs to maintain the values and vision that built this place while adapting to changing business requirements." Victoria nodded, but I could see her thinking about the implications of long-term commitment to the vineyard. During the summer between her sophomore and junior years, Victoria worked full-time at Blackwood Estate, in a role that combined vineyard management, cellar operations, and business administration. It was her first experience with comprehensive responsibility for estate operations. During this operations, she was excellent at the work. Her palate had continued developing, and her understanding of business strategy was sophisticated beyond her years. Employees respected her knowledge and enjoyed working with her. But she was also asking questions that concerned me. "Why don't we export more wine internationally?" she asked after reviewing our sales data. "European and Asian markets are growing much faster than domestic sales." International sales require different distribution networks, regulatory compliance, and marketing approaches, I explained. The complexity and risk might not justify the potential returns. But if we don't expand internationally, won't we be limiting our long-term growth potential? Victoria, we're already successful beyond anything I dreamed of when we started. Why would we risk that success for uncertain international opportunities? Because markets evolve. Consumer preferences change. Companies that don't adapt to changing conditions eventually get left behind. Victoria was applying concepts from her economics courses to critique our business strategy. Her analysis wasn't wrong, but her conclusions reflected different priorities than mine. S focused on preserving and protecting what we'd built. Victoria was focused on growth and expansion. Both perspectives had merit, but they led to different strategic recommendations. During her junior year, Victoria was accepted to a prestigious semester abroad program at the London School of Economics. The program focused on international business and would include internships with global consulting firms. "It's an incredible opportunity," Victoria told me when she called with the news. "LSE has one of the best economics programs in the world, and the internship component would give me exposure to international business practices." "When would this happen?" I asked. "Spring semester of my senior year. February through June. February through June. Including bud break, when critical vineyard management decisions had to be made. Including barrel tasting season, when final blend decisions determined wine quality. Including the period when we planned production schedules for the following year." "Victoria, that's a crucial time for vineyard operations," I said. "Spring is when we make decisions that affect the entire vintage." "I know, Mama. But this is also a once-in-a-lifetime educational opportunity. The things I'd learned could benefit the estate for decades." "What would you learn that you couldn't learn by working here during the same period?" "International market analysis, global supply chain management, currency hedging strategies, cross-cultural business practices, skills that could help us expand into overseas markets." Victoria was framing the study abroad program as preparation for improving Blackwood Estate's international competitiveness. But I suspected she was also interested in exploring career opportunities that had nothing to do with wine. "You should definitely apply," I said finally. "Education is always valuable, regardless of how you ultimately use it." "Thanks, Mama. I knew you'd understand, but I didn't understand. Or rather, I understood too well." Victoria was choosing academic and professional development over hands-on involvement with the family business. She was prioritizing her individual growth over our partnership. The choice was rational and defensible, but it also represented the beginning of her separation from everything we'd built together. Victoria spent the spring of 1997 in London, studying international economics and interning with McKinsey & Company, the prestigious management consulting firm. Her letters and phone calls were full of enthusiasm about her classes, her internship projects, and the exciting people she was meeting. "London is incredible," she told me during one of our weekly calls. "I'm learning so much about how global businesses operate and how different cultures approach commercial relationships." That sounds fascinating. How do you think it applies to wine marketing? Well, I'm working on a project analyzing luxury goods consumption patterns in Asia. The growth potential for premium wine in markets like Hong Kong and Singapore is enormous. Victoria was still connecting her experiences to potential applications for Blackwood Estate, but her frame of reference was expanding far beyond Napa Valley. "My internship supervisor thinks I have real potential for international consulting," she continued. She suggested I consider applying for their full-time analyst program after graduation. McKinsey & Company. Full-time analyst program. A career track that would take Victoria to major cities around the world, working with Fortune 500 companies on complex strategic challenges. "That's quite a compliment," I said carefully. "What did you tell her?" "That I'm flattered but haven't made any decisions about post-graduation plans yet." Haven't made any decisions yet. But she was clearly considering alternatives to returning to Blackwood Estate immediately after college. By the time Victoria returned from London in late May 1997, it was clear that our visions for her future were diverging. She was energized by her exposure to international business and excited about career possibilities in consulting, finance, or corporate strategy. I was hoping she'd return to the vineyard with new ideas for improving our operations, but renewed commitment to the family business. "How was harvest planning without me?" Victoria asked during her first week back. "Challenging," I admitted. "I missed having your input on blend decisions and production scheduling. I missed being here too. But I also learned so much that could help us think more strategically about long-term growth, such as international market entry strategies, brand positioning analysis, competitive benchmarking methodologies, tools that could help us expand beyond our current customer base." Victoria was full of ideas for applying her consulting training to Blackwood Estate, but her suggestions involved fundamental changes to our business model rather than incremental improvements to existing operations. "Victoria, we're already successful," I said. "Why would we want to change approaches that are working well?" "Because the wine industry is becoming more competitive every year. New world producers in Chile, Australia, and South Africa are gaining market share. Technology is enabling smaller operations to achieve quality levels that used to require much larger scale. If we don't innovate, we'll eventually be left behind. Or we'll maintain our position by continuing to do what we do best, rather than chasing trends that might not suit our strengths." We were having the same conversation from different perspectives. Victoria saw stagnation and missed opportunities. I saw stability and proven success. In July 1997, Victoria received a formal job offer from McKinsey & Company to join their San Francisco office as a business analyst. The position offered excellent salary, comprehensive training, international travel opportunities, and a clear path to partnership for high performers. "It's an incredible opportunity," Victoria told me when she shared the news. "McKinsey is the most prestigious consulting firm in the world. The training and experience would be invaluable regardless of what I do long-term." "What does long-term mean?" I asked. "Well, most people spend 2 to 4 years as analysts before either going to business school or moving to industry positions. I could learn consulting methodologies, work with major corporations, and then bring that experience back to help grow Blackwood Estate. 2 to 4 years. Plus potentially 2 years for an MBA. Victoria was talking about being away from the vineyard for up to 6 years during the most critical learning period of her career. "Victoria, wine quality and vineyard management require hands-on experience that can't be learned from textbooks or consulting projects," I said. "If you spend 6 years in consulting and business school, you'll miss the practical knowledge that effective estate management requires. But I'll gain strategic thinking skills and business networks that could be much more valuable than additional practical experience." "More valuable for what?" "For building Blackwood Estate into a globally recognized premium brand rather than just a successful regional winery." Victoria was positioning her consulting career as preparation for dramatically expanding our business. But I suspected she was also keeping options open for careers that had nothing to do with wine. As Victoria's senior year at Stanford approached, we had to make decisions about her role in the family business. She wanted to accept the McKinsey offer while maintaining her long-term connection to Blackwood Estate. I wanted her to commit to returning to the vineyard immediately after graduation. "I need you here," I told her during a walk through the vineyard on the evening before she returned to Stanford for her final year. "Not in 2 years or 4 years or 6 years. Now. While you still have the passion and knowledge to contribute meaningfully. Mama, I'm not abandoning the vineyard. I'm investing in skills that will make me more valuable when I do return. Victoria, this business requires continuity, customer relationships, supplier partnerships, employee loyalty. These things take years to develop and can be lost quickly if they're not maintained. But they can also be strengthened by bringing fresh perspectives and proven methodologies from other industries." We were talking past each other. Victoria saw her consulting career as an investment in her future contributions to the family business. I saw it as a distraction that would weaken her connection to everything we'd built together. "If you take the McKinsey job, what guarantee do I have that you'll ever come back?" I asked directly. "You have my word. This is home. This is family. This is what we've built together. Of course I'll come back." "When?" "When I've learned what I need to learn to make my contributions as valuable as possible." That wasn't a timeline. That was an indefinite postponement, disguised as professional development. Victoria's senior year at Stanford was dominated by her thesis project on strategic planning for small family businesses in mature industries. She used Blackwood Estate as her primary case study, analyzing our competitive position and recommending growth strategies. Her recommendations were sophisticated and well-researched. Expand internationally through selective distribution partnerships. Develop premium wine club offerings for high-value customers. Invest in direct-to-consumer e-commerce capabilities. Create experiential tourism packages that combined wine education with luxury hospitality. All good ideas, all requiring significant capital investment, operational complexity, and management attention that would divert focus from core winemaking excellence. "These are interesting concepts," I told Victoria after reviewing her thesis draft. "But they also represent fundamental changes to our business model. Fundamental changes that could double our revenue within 5 years while positioning us for long-term growth in expanding markets. Or fundamental changes that could distract us from what makes our wine special while exposing us to risks we don't fully understand. Mama, you can't avoid all risks. The biggest risk is complacency in a rapidly changing industry." Victoria was convinced that aggressive growth was necessary for long-term survival. I was convinced that aggressive growth was a threat to everything we'd carefully built. Victoria graduated summa cum laude from Stanford with a degree in economics and recognition for her outstanding senior thesis. The graduation ceremony was a proud moment for both of us. She'd achieved academic excellence while maintaining her connection to the family business. But it was also the beginning of our separation. "I'm going to accept the McKinsey offer," Victoria told me the day after graduation. "I'll start in September after spending the summer working harvest at the vineyard. For how long? 2 years initially. Then I'll evaluate my options. 2 years of international travel, corporate strategy projects, and exposure to business leaders who would reinforce her view that consulting was more intellectually stimulating than vineyard management. Victoria, once you start that career track, it becomes very difficult to leave. The money, the prestige, the intellectual challenge, they're all designed to keep talented people in the consulting world. I'm stronger than that, Mama. I know what's important to me." She was 21 years old and convinced that she could control her career trajectory perfectly. I was 45 years old and understood how life could pull you away from your original intentions. Victoria worked the 1998 harvest with intensity and dedication that reminded me of why I'd believed she would eventually take over the business. Her technical knowledge was excellent, her palate was sophisticated, and her leadership skills with our harvest crew were impressive. "This is what I love most about wine," she said one evening, as we tasted through tank samples to monitor fermentation progress. "The combination of artistry, science, and craftsmanship. You can't optimize this with spreadsheets and consulting methodologies. Then why are you leaving?" I'm not leaving. I'm taking a detour that will make me better at this when I come back. What if the detour becomes the destination? It won't. This is home. This is family. This is what we've built together. Victoria was sincere in her commitment to returning, but she was also naive about how career momentum works. 2 years in consulting would lead to promotion opportunities, salary increases, and professional relationships that would make returning to Napa Valley seem like a step backward. On September 15, 1998, I drove Victoria to San Francisco for her first day at McKinsey & Company. She was excited, nervous, and confident that she was making the right decision for her long-term contribution to the family business. "I'll call you every week," she promised as I dropped her off at her new apartment in Soma, "and I'll come home for important tastings and harvest planning." "I'll miss you," I told her. "The vineyard won't be the same without you." "It's only temporary, Mama. 2 years, maybe 3. Then I'll be back with skills and experience that will help us take Blackwood Estate to the next level." I hugged my daughter goodbye and drove back to Napa Valley alone. For the first time since 1983, I was running the vineyard without Victoria's partnership. What I didn't know was that it would be the last time we'd worked together for over 2 decades. What I didn't anticipate was that Victoria's temporary consulting career would become a permanent separation from everything we'd built together. The seeds of our future conflict had been planted. Victoria saw consulting as preparation for returning with enhanced capabilities. I saw it as the beginning of her abandonment of our shared dream. We were both right. We were both wrong. And we were both about to learn that family businesses are more fragile than either of us had imagined. September 1998. Victoria walked into McKinsey's San Francisco office for her first day as a business analyst. I drove back to Napa Valley alone. Neither of us knew we'd just begun a 23-year separation that would end with legal briefcases and corporate partnership proposals. Victoria kept her promise initially. She called every week. She came home for important tastings. She spent Christmas helping with cellar work and barrel sampling. Her enthusiasm for consulting was infectious, but her commitment to the vineyard seemed intact. "I'm learning so much about strategic planning and operational efficiency," she told me during one of her visits. "McKinsey's methodologies could really help us optimize our production and marketing." I listened politely to her consulting insights, but I was more interested in her tasting notes and blend recommendations. Those were the skills that mattered for our business. By spring 1999, Victoria's visits became less frequent. Her consulting projects required weekend work. Her training programs conflicted with our barrel tasting schedule. She missed bud break for the first time since childhood. "It's just a busy period," she explained during one of our phone calls. "Once I get established in my role, the schedule will be more predictable." But consulting schedules never become predictable. Client demands always take priority. The promise of "once things settle down" is always followed by new projects with new deadlines. Victoria was learning this reality. I was learning that my daughter's career was pulling her away from everything we'd built together. Victoria's second year at McKinsey brought promotion opportunities and international travel assignments. She spent 3 months in Hong Kong analyzing supply chain optimization for a global electronics manufacturer. She worked on strategy projects for luxury goods companies in Europe. Her experiences were broadening her perspective in ways that impressed her colleagues but concerned me. She was becoming fluent in corporate strategy language that had nothing to do with wine quality or vineyard management. "I'm working on a fascinating project about brand positioning in emerging markets," she told me during one of our increasingly infrequent phone calls. "The insights could help us develop China and India as export destinations." China and India, markets I'd never considered, because our domestic demand already exceeded our production capacity. Victoria was thinking about global expansion while I was focused on maintaining quality standards for existing customers. "Victoria, we don't need new markets," I said. "We need consistent execution in the markets we already serve." "But Mama, that's exactly the kind of limited thinking that prevents family businesses from reaching their potential." Limited thinking. My focus on quality over quantity was now characterized as a limitation rather than a strength. Plus, Our conversations were becoming exercises in mutual frustration. Victoria wanted to share her excitement about consulting projects. I wanted to discuss harvest planning and blend decisions. We were living in completely different worlds. In March 2000, Victoria called with news that changed everything. She was engaged to a fellow McKinsey consultant named David Morrison. They'd met during a project in London and had been dating for 6 months. "He's wonderful, Mama," Victoria said with genuine happiness in her voice. "Brilliant, ambitious, and he really understands my career goals." "When do I get to meet him?" "Soon. We're planning the engagement party for May. You'll love him." The engagement party was held at an exclusive restaurant in San Francisco. David was charming, intelligent, and clearly devoted to Victoria. He was also completely uninterested in wine beyond its role as a social lubricant. "Victoria tells me you own a vineyard," he said during our first conversation. "That must be a nice hobby business." Hobby business. 22 years of building Blackwood Estate into a $4 million annual operation was characterized as a hobby. "It's our family's primary business," I corrected. Victoria grew up learning every aspect of wine production and vineyard management. "Right, but she's obviously moved beyond that now. Her consulting career has so much more growth potential." David wasn't intentionally dismissive. He simply couldn't conceive that anyone would choose agriculture over corporate strategy as a career path. To him, Victoria's vineyard background was charming heritage, not valuable expertise. Victoria and David planned a December wedding in San Francisco. They wanted an urban celebration that reflected their cosmopolitan lifestyle rather than a vineyard wedding that emphasized Victoria's rural origins. "I hope you understand," Victoria explained when she told me about the venue choice. "David's family and colleagues are all based in the city. A Napa Valley wedding would be inconvenient for most of our guests." I understood the practical considerations. But I was disappointed that Victoria didn't want to celebrate her marriage at the place where she'd grown up. The vineyard had been home for 18 years. Now it was inconvenient background. Badass aura la très célébrefaux. The wedding was beautiful and sophisticated. Victoria looked radiant. David's family was welcoming. The celebration reflected their shared values of professional achievement and social connections. But I felt like an outsider, watching my daughter enter a world where I didn't belong. Victoria was becoming someone I barely recognized. After the wedding, Victoria and David moved to New York for new consulting opportunities. Victoria joined BCG, Boston Consulting Group, as a senior analyst. David took a position with Goldman Sachs. Their combined income exceeded $300,000 annually. They lived in a Manhattan apartment that cost more per month than most people earned in a year. They traveled internationally for both work and pleasure. Victoria's calls home became monthly rather than weekly. Her visits to the vineyard stopped entirely. When we did talk, our conversations were dominated by her stories about consulting projects, travel experiences, and social events in New York. "We're thinking about buying a place in the Hamptons for weekends," she told me during one call. David's firm has several clients who summer there, so it would be good for networking. The Hamptons. Victoria was planning to invest in East Coast real estate for social networking purposes, while showing no interest in the Napa Valley property where she'd grown up. I tried to stay connected by sending care packages of our latest wine releases. Victoria always thanked me politely, but never offered tasting notes or feedback. The wines had become gifts from home rather than products we'd created together. In 2003, Victoria called with news that she was pregnant. I was thrilled about becoming a grandmother, but concerned about the distance between us. "Will you come to California for the birth?" I asked. "Probably not, Mama. My doctor is here, and David's family wants to be involved. But you're welcome to visit after the baby arrives." Emma was born in August 2003. I flew to New York to meet my first granddaughter and stayed for a week, helping Victoria adjust to motherhood. Emma was beautiful and healthy. Victoria was a devoted mother, despite the demanding schedule of new parenthood, combined with consulting work. But I felt like a helpful stranger rather than a grandmother building a relationship with her grandchild. "Does Emma have any interest in the vineyard?" I asked during one of my visits. "She's 2 years old, Mama. She's interested in blocks and picture books." "I meant when she's older. Will you bring her to visit?" "Maybe. if we can find time in our schedule. Sophie was born in 2005. I made the same trip to New York, provided the same help, and returned to California feeling the same distance from my expanding family. My granddaughters were growing up in Manhattan penthouses with weekend trips to the Hamptons. They were learning about museums and Broadway shows and private schools. The vineyard was a distant story about their grandmother's hobby business. The break came during what would be our last real conversation. Victoria called in November 2006 to tell me that David had been offered a partnership track position with Goldman Sachs that would require indefinite commitment to New York. "It's an incredible opportunity," Victoria said. "Partnership would set us up financially for life." "What about your own career?" "I'm transitioning to independent consulting. I can work with clients globally while being more available for the girls." "And what about Blackwood Estate?" Long pause. "What about it?" "Victoria, we always talked about you eventually returning to help manage the family business." "Mama, that was before I had a career, a husband, and children. My life is here now." "Your life started here. Your foundation is here. Everything I built was intended to create opportunities for you. And I'm grateful for that foundation. But I'm not going to limit my children's opportunities by moving them to a small town in California. You're calling Napa Valley a limitation? I'm calling it a choice. And I've chosen a different path." There it was. Victoria had chosen her life in New York over any future involvement with Blackwood Estate. She was officially abandoning everything we'd built together. "I see," I said quietly. "Mama, this doesn't mean we can't stay in touch. You're always welcome to visit. The girls would love to see more of their grandmother, as long as I don't expect them to care about the family business. As long as you understand that they're growing up in a different world with different opportunities." That conversation ended our relationship. Not with shouting or accusations. With mutual recognition that we wanted incompatible things from Victoria's future. After 2006, Victoria and I spoke maybe 3 times per year. Polite conversations about the girls' school achievements or David's career milestones. No discussion of the vineyard. No sharing of personal struggles or triumphs. Cough-fear. I sent birthday cards and Christmas gifts that were acknowledged with thank you notes. Victoria sent holiday photos of her family that I displayed on my refrigerator, like tokens from a world I'd never be part of. During those 17 years, I built Blackwood Estate into exactly what Victoria had criticized me for avoiding. A globally recognized premium brand with international distribution, luxury tourism experiences, and $50 million annual revenue. I accomplished everything Victoria had recommended in her Stanford thesis. I proved that growth and innovation were possible without abandoning quality standards or family values. But I did it without her. Every success felt hollow because the person I'd most wanted to share it with had chosen to pursue success elsewhere. In 2019, I turned 70. I started thinking seriously about succession planning for the first time. Not because I was ready to retire, but because I was realistic about mortality. I also started receiving inquiries from Victoria's lawyers about Blackwood Estate's corporate structure. Subtle questions about ownership, valuation, and inheritance planning. I knew she was positioning herself for eventual claims on the business. GAN. That's when I restructured everything. I transferred 60% ownership to an irrevocable trust, benefiting the employees who'd actually built the business alongside me. I created legal barriers that would prevent family disputes from destroying what we'd accomplished. I spent 4 years preparing for the conversation that happened on that Tuesday morning in 2023. 4 years planning my response to Victoria's inevitable return with partnership proposals and succession demands. Victoria left my tasting room defeated but not destroyed. The personal inheritance I'd established would provide generously for her and her daughters. They'd never face financial insecurity because of my decisions. But they also wouldn't inherit control of a business they'd never contributed to building. That control would remain with the people who'd earned it through dedication and expertise. 3 days after Victoria's visit, I received a letter from her attorney. Not a legal challenge. A request for information about the personal trust provisions and distribution timeline. Victoria had accepted my decision. She wasn't going to fight the estate planning structure. or contest the trust arrangements. She was moving forward with her life in New York while ensuring her daughter's financial security. 2 weeks later, I received something unexpected. A personal letter from Victoria. "Dear Mama," it began, "I've had time to think about our conversation. I want you to know that I respect your decisions about the business and the trust. You built something extraordinary, and you have every right to ensure its continuation under leadership that shares your values. I also want you to know that I never stopped loving you or feeling grateful for everything you taught me. My choices about career and location were about pursuing opportunities, not about rejecting our family's legacy. I understand why you feel I abandoned the vineyard. From your perspective, I probably did. But I hope you can understand that I was trying to build something meaningful in my own way, just as you did. Emma is graduating from high school this spring. Sophie is 16 and already thinking about college. They're both remarkable young women who would benefit from knowing their grandmother better. If you're willing, I'd like to bring them to visit the vineyard this summer. Not to discuss business or inheritance. Just to let them see where their mother grew up and meet the woman who built everything that made our opportunities possible. With love and respect, Victoria." I read the letter 3 times before responding. "Dear Victoria," I wrote back, "I would be honored to meet Emma and Sophie as young women rather than distant granddaughters. They're welcome at Blackwood Estate anytime you're ready to visit. You're right that we made different choices based on different priorities. I chose to build something that would last for generations. You chose to build a life that maximized opportunities for your children. Both choices have merit. You some itineraries for your children. You some coast. I hope your daughters will understand that family legacy isn't just about inheriting assets. It's about inheriting values, work ethic, and the confidence that comes from knowing you can build something meaningful, regardless of your starting point. Those lessons are available to them whether or not they ever work in the wine business. With love, Mama." Emma and Sophie visited Blackwood Estate in July 2023. They spent a week learning about wine production, vineyard management, and the history of what their grandmother had built from nothing. Emma was fascinated by the business strategy aspects of wine marketing and distribution. Sophie was more interested in the agricultural science of viticulture and soil management. Both were impressed by the scope of what one woman had accomplished through determination and vision. "Grandma, why didn't Mom ever tell us how amazing this place is?" Emma asked during a sunset walk through the vineyard rows. "Your mother has different definitions of amazing," I explained. "She finds consulting and global business more exciting than making wine." "But you built this from nothing. That's incredible. Your mother built a successful consulting career from nothing too. Different kinds of achievement require different kinds of courage." Victoria watched her daughters discover their agricultural heritage with a mixture of pride and regret. She could see what they'd missed by growing up in Manhattan rather than Napa Valley. But she could also see what they'd gained through exposure to international culture and educational opportunities. "Thank you for this," Victoria told me on their last evening. "For letting them see this place. For helping them understand where they come from. This will always be here for them," I said, "if they ever want to be part of it. And if they don't, then they'll have learned that building something meaningful is possible regardless of the industry or location. That's the most important lesson anyway." Today, Blackwood Estate continues under employee ownership and management. Carlos runs vineyard operations. Maria handles winemaking decisions. James manages sales and distribution. The business they helped build will continue long after I'm gone. Victoria and her daughters visit twice a year now. Emma is studying economics at Columbia and considering a summer internship in wine marketing. Sophie is planning to major in agricultural science and might spend a gap year learning vineyard management. Neither of my granddaughters will inherit controlling interest in Blackwood Estate, but they'll inherit something more valuable. The understanding that success comes from building something meaningful, working with people you trust, and staying true to your values even when others question your choices. Victoria learned those lessons too, even if she applied them in corporate consulting rather than wine production. She built a successful career, raised accomplished daughters, and created financial security for her family. We chose different paths, But we both chose to build, rather than simply consume. We both chose to work towards something larger than ourselves. We both chose to create opportunities for the next generation. Bobonrilad ihas. The conflict between us wasn't really about business succession or family loyalty. It was about different definitions of success and different visions of how to honor family legacy. Hasho kikashosi. Hasho kikasho kikas. The conflict was Sethiano, tasho kikashosi. In the end, we were both right. And we were both wrong. But we were both builders. That's the most important lesson I can pass down to Emma and Sophie. Build something, create value, work with people you trust. Stay true to your values. Whether you do it in a vineyard, a consulting firm, or something we haven't imagined yet, the principles remain the same. After decades of silence, my daughter finally came home. Not to steal everything, as I'd feared, but to share it with her daughters so they could understand where they came from and who they might become. Kamachtaham tachatham. I was ready for her return. I was prepared for her demands. I was protected against her ambitions. Awarazipuramian. What I wasn't prepared for was forgiveness, for understanding, for the possibility that family legacy could be honored in different ways by different generations. Victoria and I will never be business partners, but we can be grandmother and mother to two remarkable young women who represent the future of whatever they choose to build. Nyambutmas. That's enough. That's everything. 23 years of silence ended not with triumph or defeat, but with understanding. Victoria had come home not to steal everything, but to ensure her daughters knew where they came from. Babas Turk, silent. Theoland, I had been ready for war. Instead, I found peace. Sometimes the greatest victory is discovering that you no longer need to win. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.